It's almost midnight. The streets are silent, the city lights are flickering, and there's a cold breeze in the air that feels heavier than usual. Our protagonist, a tired commuter, walks briskly towards the station, his coat pulled tight against the chill. He checks his watch. It's late, and he just wants to get home. He steps onto the platform, barely noticing how deserted it is. The only sound is the faint hum of an approaching train. When the train screeches to a halt, the doors slide open with a mechanical groan, revealing an almost empty carriage. At first, it seems perfect, a quiet, late-night ride after a long day. He boards the train, picks a seat near the middle, and slouches down, ready to zone out. But something feels off. The lights inside flicker slightly as the train pulls away from the station. He glances around. There are maybe 5 or 6 other passengers scattered about, each sitting eerily still. No phones, no books, no conversations, just silence. The commuter shrugs it off at first. Maybe they're just tired like me, he thinks. But then, the unease starts to creep in. One by one, he starts noticing the passengers. An old man in a trench coat stares blankly ahead, his hands trembling as if he's holding something invisible. A young woman clutches a bouquet of wilted flowers, tears rolling silently down her face. Another man, wearing a tattered uniform, looks down at his hands as if bloodied, though they're clean. And then the strangest thing happens. As the commuter leans back, trying to shake off the weird vibe, he notices none of them are breathing. His heart races. He tells himself it's just his imagination. But the chill in the air grows heavier, colder. Suddenly the train jolts, and the lights flicker again, longer this time. In the brief darkness, he hears it, a whisper. Not words, just sounds, like someone trying to speak, but trapped underwater. The lights come back on. He looks around. Nobody else seems to notice. The passengers are still in their strange, unnatural silence. Then, his eyes catch something in the reflection of the window. Behind him, 2 rows back, someone or something is standing. He spins around, but there's no one there. His breath quickens. His instincts scream at him to get off at the next stop. But just as he looks up at the digital display, the name of the next station blinks, and then vanishes. No destination. No way to know where this train is headed. He's stuck on the midnight train. Where is it taking him? And who or what are the passengers? The train barrels through the night, its rhythmic clatter echoing in the quiet carriage. Our commuter grips the edge of his seat, his knuckles white. He glances at the digital display again, hoping it was a glitch, but it remains blank. No station name, no ETA. Just an empty screen glowing faintly. He takes a deep breath, trying to steady himself. Calm down. You're overthinking this, he mutters under his breath. But then he looks around again, and this time he can't ignore what he sees. The passengers. The old man in the trench coat still hasn't moved. His hands tremble as if he's holding onto some unseen burden. The young woman with the bouquet continues to stare at the flowers, tears falling steadily. She hasn't wiped them away, not once. And then there's the man in the tattered uniform. His head is bowed, his lips moving ever so slightly. Is he praying? Whispering? The commuter squints, trying to hear, but it's like the words are swallowed by the air before they reach him. It feels like he's in a scene frozen in time. His heart pounds. He needs to do something. Say something. Anything to break the silence. So he clears his throat and forces out a shaky, anyone know when the next stop is? Nothing. No one even looks up. He tries again, louder this time. Excuse me. Do you know where this train is headed? Still no response. The silence presses down on him, heavier than before. It's not the kind of silence you find in an empty room. It's alive, buzzing faintly like static just out of earshot. Desperate for some kind of interaction, he stands up and approaches the young woman with the bouquet. Hey, he says softly, leaning down. Are you okay? Do you need help? She doesn't move, doesn't blink. And then, without warning, she whispers, "He promised he'd come back." The commuter freezes. Her voice is soft, fragile, like it's coming from a long-forgotten place. He leans in closer. "What do you mean? Who promised?" But she doesn't answer. She just clutches the flowers tighter, her knuckles pale against the wilted stems. He backs away, his pulse racing. What is happening here? Before he can process, a sound cuts through the air, a faint, low hum. It grows louder, filling the carriage with an electric charge. The lights flicker violently, plunging the train into a strobe-like chaos. And then he sees it. The passengers begin to change. The old man's trembling hands seem to clutch something now, an invisible steering wheel, as his face twists into an expression of terror. The man in the uniform's whispers turn to screams, his hands clawing at his chest like he's reliving some unimaginable pain. The young woman's tears fall faster, and she starts muttering, he promised," over and over again. The commuter stumbles back into his seat, his breathing ragged. The train's hum quiets, the flickering stops, and the carriage falls back into silence. But now the silence feels different. It's not empty anymore, it's heavy, dense. And as he sits there trembling, he begins to understand. These aren't just passengers. They're echoes, shadows of people caught in the moment of their death. And he's trapped with them. The train keeps moving, its destination unknown. But one thing is clear. This journey is far from over. The train rumbles on, the world outside an endless blur of darkness. Our commuter sits frozen in his seat, his mind racing to make sense of what he's witnessed. The passengers, those haunting figures, they weren't alive. Not in the way he understood. But then the thought strikes him like a lightning bolt. If they're all spirits, what am I doing here? His breathing quickens. He needs answers. His eyes dart toward the front of the carriage. Somewhere on this train, there must be someone in charge, someone who can explain what's happening. He stands, his legs shaky beneath him, and makes his way forward. The train sways, the metal floor creaking under his hesitant steps. The passengers remain still, locked in their strange, unnerving states. Finally, he reaches the front of the carriage. A small booth labeled conductor stands just ahead, its door slightly ajar. He hesitates, his hand hovering near the door. "Hello," he calls out, his voice trembling. "Is anyone in there?" A faint rustling sound comes from inside. Slowly, the door creaks open, revealing a man in a dark uniform. The conductor steps out, his face partially shadowed by the brim of his cap. "Something wrong?" the conductor asks, his voice calm but carrying a weight that makes the commuter uneasy. The commuter exhales sharply, trying to gather his thoughts. "Look, I don't know what's going on here, but something's not right. The passengers, they're not normal." The conductor's eyes, sharp and knowing, meet his. "And what makes you think you belong here?" The question hits him like a punch to the gut. He stammers, I just got on the train. I'm heading home. That's all." The conductor chuckles softly, but there's no humor in it. "Home? Is that where you think this train is headed?" The commuter's throat tightens. "What do you mean? Where is this train going?" The conductor steps closer, his voice dropping to a low whisper. "This isn't a train for the living. The passengers here, they're reliving the last moments of their lives, over and over again, until they make peace with it, or something else decides for them." The commuter's chest tightens. "I'm not dead. I don't belong here." The conductor's expression hardens. "Maybe you don't. Or maybe you just haven't realized it yet." The words send a chill down the commuter's spine. He shakes his head, refusing to accept it. "No, there's been a mistake. I'm alive. I'm sure of it." The conductor sighs, as though he's heard this all before. "Listen carefully," he says. "This train doesn't stop for everyone. If you're here, there's a reason, and you'd better figure it out before we reach the end of the line." The commuter's heart pounds as he grabs the conductor's arm, desperation taking over. How do I get off this train? Tell me. The conductor pulls his arm free, his gaze distant. There's only one way off this train, and it's not something I can give you. With that, the conductor turns and disappears back into his booth, the door shutting firmly behind him. The commuter stands there, paralyzed by fear and confusion. Not a train for the living, reliving their deaths. None of it makes sense. But one thing is certain now. This isn't just a train ride. It's something far more sinister. And whatever lies at the end of the line, he's not ready to face it. The train surges forward, its haunting rhythm growing louder. Like a heartbeat that won't let him forget, the train feels colder now, the air heavy with an oppressive weight. The commuter stumbles back to his seat, his mind a storm of confusion and dread. The conductor's words replay in his head. This isn't a train for the living. His hands tremble as he grips the edge of his seat, his eyes darting to the passengers. They haven't moved, but now he sees them differently. These aren't just strangers. They're trapped, caught in some horrifying loop of their final moments. And what about him? If this isn't a train for the living, then why is he here? He forces himself to breathe, his thoughts racing. Think, he whispers to himself. There has to be a way to prove I'm alive. His phone. He scrambles to pull it from his pocket, relief flooding him when he sees the screen light up. A sign of the real world, of connection. But the relief is short-lived. The screen is frozen, displaying a single message. No service. He taps the screen, swipes, presses buttons, but nothing changes. The phone refuses to respond, the message taunting him. Suddenly, a faint sound catches his attention, a soft sobbing. He looks up to see the young woman with the bouquet. Her shoulders shake as she cries, the withered flowers clutched tightly in her hands. Driven by equal parts sympathy and desperation for answers, he stands and approaches her. Hey, I'm sorry, but I need to ask you something. She doesn't respond. He hesitates before sitting across from her. Why are you here? He asks softly. For a moment, it seems like she won't answer. But then, in a voice so quiet it's almost a whisper, she says, He said he'd wait for me. But I was late. The commuter leans closer. Who? Who said he'd wait? Her tear-streaked face lifts slightly, her empty eyes staring past him. My fiancé. He was at the station. But I didn't make it in time. The train. Her voice falters, and she looks down at the flowers. I bought these for him. For our wedding. But the train didn't stop in time. The commuter's breath catches in his throat. Her words sink in, each one heavier than the last. Before he can respond, the train jolts violently. He grips the seat to steady himself as the lights flicker again. The hum, louder than ever, fills the air. And then, for the first time, the passengers move. The old man clenches his invisible will tighter, his face contorted in agony. The man in the uniform gasps for air, clutching at his chest as though reliving a fatal wound. The young woman cradles the bouquet, her sobs turning to gasps. The commuter's heart pounds as he looks around, his instincts screaming at him to run. But where? The train is endless, a prison hurtling through the void. Then, as quickly as it began, the chaos stops. The passengers fall silent once more, frozen in their sorrow. The commuter stumbles back to his seat, his mind spinning. He doesn't know what's more terrifying, the passengers reliving their deaths, or the possibility that he's supposed to do the same. He stares out the window, his reflection distorted against the black void. And for the first time, a chilling thought crosses his mind. What if I don't remember how I got here, because I don't want to? The train's rhythm continues, relentless and haunting. The end of the line feels closer with every passing second. The train's hum grows louder, almost alive, vibrating through the commuter's chest. He sits frozen, staring out the window at the darkness, as the pieces of a puzzle he doesn't want to solve start forming in his mind. His own reflection stares back, pale and gaunt. And for the first time, He notices the faint smudge of something on his shirt, a dark stain near his chest. He tries to wipe it off, but it won't budge. His fingers tremble as he pulls his hand away. Blood. His heart races. No, it's not mine. It can't be. He shuts his eyes tightly, willing himself to wake up from this nightmare. But when he opens them, the train is still there, the blood is still there, and the unrelenting hum of the tracks seems to mock him. A sudden flicker of movement pulls his attention to the aisle. The young woman with the bouquet is gone. Her seat is empty, the withered flowers left behind, scattered like ash. Panic wells up in his chest. Where did she go? He mutters to himself. He glances around the carriage. The old man still grips his invisible wheel, locked in his silent torment. The soldier slumps forward, his hand pressed to his chest. But at the far end of the carriage, he sees her, a shadowy figure now standing near the next door. Her back is to him, but something about her feels off. Her movements are unnatural, jerky, as if she's being controlled by invisible strings. He swallows hard and stands. His feet feel like lead as he walks toward her, each step echoing in the silent carriage. Hey, he calls out. Where are you going? She doesn't respond, doesn't even turn around. Instead, she raises her hand and places it on the door, pushing it open. A burst of cold air rushes in, carrying a sound that chills him to the bone. A distant, mournful whistle, like the wail of a ghostly train in the distance. No, wait, he shouts, breaking into a run. But by the time he reaches the door, she's gone. The door swings shut behind her, leaving nothing but emptiness beyond. He hesitates, his hand hovering over the handle. The cold air seeps through the cracks, biting at his skin. Something tells him that opening this door might lead to answers, or something far worse. Before he can decide, a sudden flash of memory hits him. It's not clear, just a fragment, like a broken shard of glass catching the light. He's in a car. It's dark, the road illuminated only by the faint glow of streetlights. Music plays softly on the radio. His hands grip the steering wheel. And then impact. The memory fades as quickly as it came, leaving him gasping for air. He staggers back, clutching the edge of a seat. A car? Was I in an accident? His mind races, trying to pull more from the void, but the train jerks violently, snapping him back to reality. He falls to the floor, the cold metal pressing against his hands and knees. The conductor's voice suddenly echoes in his head. There's a reason you're here, and you'd better figure it out before we reach the end of the line. He looks up, his gaze locking onto the door. Beyond it, he feels the weight of something waiting for him. Answers, perhaps, or the truth he's been avoiding. Slowly, he rises to his feet. His hand moves toward the door, hesitating just for a moment before gripping the handle. And then, with a deep breath, he pulls it open, the door creaks open, and a wave of freezing air sweeps over him. The hum of the train fades, replaced by an eerie silence. He steps through, finding himself in another carriage, but this one is unlike anything he's seen before. The lights flicker erratically, casting strange shadows on the walls. The seats are old, cracked, and dusty, as if abandoned long ago. A faint mist clings to the floor, swirling around his feet. His pulse quickens. He feels like he's crossed into another realm, a place that isn't meant to exist. At the far end of the carriage, he sees the young woman with the bouquet. But something about her has changed. She's no longer crying. Instead, she stands perfectly still, her head tilted slightly to the side, as if listening to something he cannot hear. Hey, he calls out, his voice trembling. Why did you leave? She doesn't move. As he takes a cautious step closer, he notices the mist rising higher, wrapping around his legs. The air feels heavier with every step, pressing down on his chest. I just want to talk, he says, his voice softer now, almost pleading. The woman finally turns to face him, and he freezes. Her eyes are lifeless, hollow like deep black voids. Her once tear-streaked face is now eerily calm, her expression almost serene. But it's her smile, a thin, unnatural curve, that sends a chill down his spine. "You're getting closer," she says, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it echoes unnaturally in the empty space. "Closer to what?" he asks, his throat dry. She steps forward, and the mist parts around her as though it's alive. "To the truth," she says. "To why you're here." The train jolts violently, and he grabs onto a nearby seat to steady himself. The flickering lights flash brighter for a moment, and in that brief illumination he sees something horrifying. The seats in this carriage aren't empty. Figures sit slumped in them, their faces shrouded in shadows, their bodies twisted in unnatural positions. Some appear to be frozen mid-scream, others with their hands clutching invisible wounds. He stumbles backward, his breath coming in short gasps. What is this place?" The woman tilts her head again, her smile widening. "It's where we wait," she says. "Wait for what?" "For you." Her words strike him like a blow. No, I don't belong here," he says, shaking his head. "I'm alive. I'm not like you." The woman takes another step closer, her movements slow and deliberate. "Are you sure?" The question cuts through his denial, planting a seed of doubt. He takes a shaky step back, his mind racing. "I don't remember," he admits, his voice barely audible. She gestures to the mist, which seems to swirl faster now, forming shapes, blurry images that flicker like a fading reel of film. "Look," she says. Reluctantly, he watches as the mist takes shape. He sees himself in a car, the same fragment of memory from before. The headlights illuminate a dark road. He's driving, his hands tight on the wheel. And then it happens. A truck appears out of nowhere, its headlights blinding. The sound of screeching tires fills his ears. He remembers the sharp, sickening jolt of impact, the shattering glass, the chaos. The mist dissolves, leaving him gasping for air. His knees buckle, and he sinks to the floor. "No," he whispers. That doesn't mean anything. It doesn't prove anything." The woman kneels beside him, her lifeless eyes fixed on his. "You already know, don't you?" Tears sting his eyes as he shakes his head, refusing to believe it. The train lurches again, harder this time, and the mist dissipates entirely. The woman rises to her feet, her smile fading. "We're almost there," she says, her voice low and somber. "You don't have much time left." "Time for what?" he asks, his voice breaking. "To remember," she says, "and to choose." Before he can ask what she means, the carriage begins to dissolve around him, the walls and seats fading into darkness. The only thing left is the cold, the sound of the train's whistle, and the heavy weight of the truth pressing down on him. Darkness engulfs him as the last fragments of the carriage dissolve. The sound of the train's whistle reverberates, distant and mournful, echoing endlessly in the void. His heartbeat pounds in his ears as he finds himself standing in what feels like an endless tunnel, its walls shrouded in shifting shadows. A faint glow appears ahead, flickering like a dying flame. Compelled by something he cannot explain, he moves toward it. The ground beneath his feet feels cold and uneven, and each step echoes unnaturally, as if the tunnel itself is listening. As he approaches the light, it takes shape, an old, battered lantern, hanging from a crooked metal hook. Beneath it stands the conductor. His shadow looms larger than it should, stretching impossibly across the walls of the tunnel. The conductor's face is still obscured beneath the brim of his hat, but his voice is as clear and commanding as ever. "You're late," he says, his tone carrying both authority and sorrow. "Late for what?" the commuter asks, his voice trembling. "For understanding," the conductor replies. "And for deciding." The commuter's hands curl into fists. "I don't even know what's happening. Why am I here? What do you want from me?" The conductor raises a gloved hand and gestures to the tunnel. "It's not about what I want. It's about what you need to see." The walls of the tunnel begin to shift, the shadows breaking apart like shards of glass. They swirl and reform, creating vivid images that float in the air around him. The first image is of himself, sitting in his car, laughing, with a passenger beside him. It's a woman. Her face is familiar, but he can't place her. She's smiling, her eyes full of warmth and trust. He starts, but his voice trails off. The image dissolves, replaced by another. This time, it's the moment of the crash. He sees it in horrifying detail, the truck swerving, the blinding headlights, the sheer force of impact. The car crumples like paper, glass shattering in slow motion. He stumbles back, tears streaming down his face. No, stop. I don't want to see this. The conductor's voice is steady. You must. The final image appears, and it's the one that breaks him. He sees himself lying on the ground, blood pooling beneath him. The woman, his passenger, is motionless beside him, her hand still clutching a small bouquet of flowers. The flowers, the same ones the young woman on the train was holding. He falls to his knees, his breath coming in ragged gasps. It's not real. It can't be real. The conductor steps closer, his voice softer now. You've been running from this, refusing to face it. But the truth always catches up. He looks up, his eyes filled with despair. So what does this mean? Am I dead? The conductor tilts his head. Not yet. You're in the in-between, where the lost come to remember and decide. Decide what? To let go, or to hold on, the conductor says. To move forward, or remain trapped in the echoes of what once was. The tunnel begins to shake, the images around him shattering into fragments of light. The ground feels unsteady beneath him, as if the very fabric of this place is unraveling. You don't have much time, the conductor says. The train is nearing the end of the line. You must choose before we arrive. But I don't know what to do, the commuter shouts, his voice cracking. The conductor leans closer, his shadow looming over him. Then listen to your heart. It already knows. The lantern flickers, and the conductor begins to fade, his voice echoing one last time. Remember her. Remember yourself. And choose wisely. The commuter is left alone in the darkness, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. The train whistle sounds again, louder this time, pulling him back toward the unknown. As the tunnel collapses into light, he realizes he's back on the train, seated in the same spot where this journey began. But everything feels different now. The hum of the train, the faces of the passengers, they're no longer just a mystery. They're mirrors of himself. The train moves steadily through the night, but the air feels heavier now, like the weight of everything he's seen has seeped into the very walls. He sits silently, staring out the window, though there's nothing to see but an endless expanse of darkness. The other passengers sit quietly too, their faces still shrouded in that strange mix of shadow and light. But something has changed. He notices them glancing his way, their expressions no longer passive. There's something in their eyes, expectation perhaps, or hope that he feels the ache of the truth he can no longer deny. He's one of them. The young woman with the bouquet suddenly appears in the seat across from him. The flowers in her lap seem even more vivid now, their petals untouched by time. She gazes at him with a soft, almost sad smile. You're starting to understand, aren't you? She asks, her voice gentle but knowing. He nods slowly. I was in the crash. I died, didn't I? Her smile fades, replaced by a look of deep empathy. Yes, but death isn't always the end. Sometimes it's a bridge, a place to make peace with what came before. The words hit him like a tidal wave. That's why I'm here, to make peace. The train picks up speed again, its rhythmic motion carrying him through the endless night. The faces of the other passengers, their features still blurred and distant, remain fixed in place. But now he feels a sense of unity with them, as if their stories and his have intertwined into one long, winding tale. He sits silently, his mind racing with what he's just experienced. The conversation with the woman, the moment of letting go, the love he'd felt and then lost. Everything is so clear now, as though a veil has been lifted. But even with the clarity, there's still something gnawing at him. A question that won't leave. What now? He mutters, more to himself than anyone else. The woman with the bouquet appears again, this time beside him. She looks at him with a knowing expression, as though she's been waiting for him to ask. "You've done what was needed," she says, her voice calm and reassuring. "But the journey isn't over." "Not yet." He turns to her, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I let go. I chose peace." She nods, but her smile fades slightly. "Yes, you've made your choice. But there's still a choice left to make." He stares at her, confused. "What choice?" I don't understand." She gestures to the train around them. "This train is not just for those who've passed. It's for those who are still in between. You're not the only one who's waiting. There are others who haven't found their way yet, and their journeys are tied to yours." The train shakes suddenly, as though reacting to her words. A deep rumble reverberates through the walls, and the lights flicker. For a brief moment, everything feels off balance, like the world itself is holding its breath. "Others?" he repeats, his voice trembling. The woman's gaze softens. "Yes, those who are lost, who can't move forward. They need help, just like you did." He looks around, his heart racing. "But I don't know how to help them. I've barely helped myself." "You've already begun," she says quietly. "It's in the choices you've made, the peace you've found. It's not just for you. It's for those who need to hear your story. Your journey is far from over." The train suddenly slows, the noise of the wheels on the track becoming more pronounced. Through the windows, he sees a light in the distance, faint but growing brighter. It's a destination, a place that seems both familiar and unknown. He feels a sudden pull in his chest, a magnetic force drawing him forward. The air in the train feels thicker now, charged with anticipation. It's as though the train itself is nearing a turning point, and everything inside of it is preparing for what comes next. "We're almost there," the woman says, her voice soft but full of purpose. "Where?" he asks, his heart pounding. "To the threshold," she replies. "The place where the final choice must be made." The train slows to a halt, and the doors open with a soft hiss. The platform outside is bathed in a warm, golden light, unlike anything he's seen before. It's beautiful, peaceful, a stark contrast to the darkness that surrounded them earlier. Chapter 9. The Threshold of Forever. The train picks up speed again, its rhythmic motion carrying him through the endless night. The faces of the other passengers, their features still blurred and distant, remain fixed in place. But now he feels a sense of unity with them, as if their stories and his have intertwined into one long, winding tale. He sits silently, his mind racing with what he's just experienced. The conversation with the woman, the moment of letting go, the love he'd felt and then lost. Everything is so clear now, as though a veil has been lifted. But even with the clarity, there's still something gnawing at him. A question that won't leave. "What now?" he mutters, more to himself than anyone else. The woman with the bouquet appears again, this time beside him. She looks at him with a knowing expression, as though she's been waiting for him to ask. "You've done what was needed," she says, her voice calm and reassuring. "But the journey isn't over." "Not yet." He turns to her, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I let go. I chose peace." She nods, but her smile fades slightly. "Yes, you've made your choice. But there's still a choice left to make." He stares at her, confused. "What choice?" I don't understand." She gestures to the train around them. "This train is not just for those who've passed. It's for those who are still in between. You're not the only one who's waiting. There are others who haven't found their way yet, and their journeys are tied to yours." The train shakes suddenly, as though reacting to her words. A deep rumble reverberates through the walls, and the lights flicker. For a brief moment, everything feels off balance, like the world itself is holding its breath. "Others?" he repeats, his voice trembling. The woman's gaze softens. "Yes, those who are lost, who can't move forward. They need help, just like you did. He looks around, his heart racing. But I don't know how to help them. I've barely helped myself. You've already begun, she says quietly. It's in the choices you've made, the peace you've found. It's not just for you. It's for those who need to hear your story. Your journey is far from over. The train suddenly slows, the noise of the wheels on the track becoming more pronounced. Through the windows, he sees a light in the distance, faint but growing brighter. It's a destination, a place that seems both familiar and unknown. He feels a sudden pull in his chest, a magnetic force drawing him forward. The air in the train feels thicker now, charged with anticipation. It's as though the train itself is nearing a turning point, and everything inside of it is preparing for what comes next. We're almost there, the woman says, her voice soft but full of purpose. Where? He asks, his heart pounding. To the threshold, she replies. The place where the final choice must be made. The train slows to a halt, and the doors open with a soft hiss. The platform outside is bathed in a warm, golden light, unlike anything he's seen before. It's beautiful, peaceful, a stark contrast to the darkness that surrounded them earlier. But there's something unsettling about it too, something that makes his stomach churn with a sense of finality. The woman turns to him one last time, her eyes filled with understanding. This is where we part ways. You've walked this far, but now the path is yours alone. He stands, his legs unsteady, and steps toward the door. His heart races, uncertainty gnawing at him. I don't know what to do. What if I'm not ready? She smiles gently, her face glowing in the warm light. You are. You've always been. Now all you need to do is walk through. With one last look at her, he steps out of the train. The moment his feet touch the ground, he feels the air change, the weight of everything he's experienced settling on him like a heavy cloak. He stands at the edge of the threshold, the light from the platform bathing him in its warmth. But ahead of him, beyond the light, is an endless expanse of shadows, a road that stretches far into the distance. His heart races, but there's something else now. A sense of peace, a sense of readiness. He knows this is the final choice, the point of no return. The train behind him pulls away, its whistle fading into the distance. The woman's voice echoes in his mind, "You've always been ready." And for the first time in what feels like forever, he steps forward. The road ahead stretches into the unknown, dark yet welcoming. It feels as though everything he's experienced, the faces, the conversations, the choices, has led him to this very moment. His feet move without hesitation, as if they know the way better than his mind does. The light from the platform dims behind him, swallowed by the shadows, leaving him standing alone in the vast, quiet expanse. A cool breeze sweeps through, rustling the air, but it doesn't feel cold, just right, like the calm after a storm. He stops, just for a moment, to breathe. The weight he's carried for so long is almost gone now, replaced by a profound sense of clarity. His journey on the train was not just about understanding what happened. It was about letting go, about finding peace with the past, and now, it's time to face whatever lies ahead. He feels a presence beside him, and he doesn't need to turn to know who it is. The young woman with the bouquet is there again, standing silently beside him, her gentle smile reassuring. "You've done it," she says, her voice light but full of meaning. "You've made it to the final step." He looks at her, a question forming in his mind. What happens now? Is this it? The end? She shakes her head, the softest of laughs escaping her lips. No, not the end. Just a new beginning. He nods slowly, his mind trying to grasp the depth of her words. For all the fear he once felt, there's nothing now but acceptance. "But I'm still alone," he says, his voice faltering. "What if I have to walk this path by myself?" The woman's gaze softens, and she places a hand on his shoulder. "You're never truly alone. You've learned that already. The connections you've made, the people you've loved, they never leave you. They carry on in ways you can't always see." He closes his eyes, thinking of the woman who had been beside him in the crash. The memories come flooding back, her laugh, her touch, the way she looked at him. "I still feel her," he says quietly. "It's like she's still here with me." "She is," the woman replies gently, "in your heart, in your soul. And when the time comes, you'll see her again." A sense of calm settles over him, the kind he hasn't felt in years. The journey, the pain, the longing, it's all starting to fade. There's no fear now, only a quiet acceptance. He takes a deep breath and steps forward once more. The path ahead no longer dark and intimidating, but bathed in a soft, welcoming glow. It's not a light he can see with his eyes, but a light that fills him with warmth and understanding. "This is it," he whispers to himself. "This is the step I needed to take." The woman with the bouquet watches him as he walks. There's a look of pride in her eyes, but also something else, something unspoken. The light grows brighter ahead, the shadows shifting, the road leading him to a place of peace. As he walks further into the unknown, the world around him begins to change, the train's soft hum fading into the background, replaced by the gentle sound of something much more profound, the rhythm of his own heart, beating in perfect sync with the universe. The light at the end of the road isn't just a destination. It's the beginning of everything. And as he steps into it, he knows without a doubt that this is not an end at all. It's a new beginning, a new journey that's only just begun. And for the first time in what feels like forever, he steps forward, knowing he is no longer lost. He is free.